Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in this video, this is part 2 of the 13 most commonly misunderstood topics on guitar. So definitely make sure to watch part 1 before watching this video because this is just a continuation. Everything kind of builds off of the previous concept. In this video, we're going to start on concept 7. The previous video has concepts 1 through 6 in it. So if you haven't seen part 1, the link to that will be below. I'll post a link to both the website version, which contains an ad-free video, plus a written lesson. I'll also post a link to the YouTube version, which if you just want to stay on YouTube, you can watch that version if you want. So that will all be below. Make sure to check that out. Let's get started. Alright, point number 7. I'm looking to learn how to solo over the entire fretboard in key, therefore I must learn my modes. So this is only a guitar player thing. The guitar player community has made this thing out of modes that is just the biggest misconception that you're ever going to see. Modes are not patterns on the fretboard. If you are trying to play in key, if you're trying to learn how to solo in a key, say you're trying to solo in the key of A minor over an A minor backing track, you're going to use the A minor scale, all right, the A natural minor scale. You're going to use that one scale over all of the chords because that's the key you're playing in. This was discussed in the past video. The A minor scale has just 7 notes. So those 7 notes can be found all over the fretboard. Those 7 notes can be found on just one string, on just one string, on just one string. Those 7 notes can be found on any of the 6 strings, and they can form many different patterns. That's why it's only a guitar player thing. Because on the guitar, the notes move this way, they move parallel to the strings, and they also move this way, perpendicular to the strings. So if you take those 7 notes and you play them in just this area, it's going to form a pattern. If you take those same 7 notes and you play them in this area, it's going to form a different pattern. If you take those same 7 notes and form another pattern here, it's going to be yet another pattern. So people in the guitar community will say, okay, well, this is a mode, this is a mode, this is a mode, this is a mode, and then you put all these different modes together, and then ultimately you cover the entire fretboard. But that has nothing to do with modes. Those are just patterns of the same 7 notes. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's one pattern of those 7 notes. The A natural minor contains the notes A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So here's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you start back on A. So that's 7 notes in one pattern. Starting over. Then I could play this other pattern on some of the higher strings. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, back at A. And then I could play these 2 notes also because the high E string and the low E string are the same notes. So these 2 notes. So here's one pattern of those 7 notes. I don't have to play them in that order. I can play them in any order that I want. I can play them in any order that I want. It does not matter. I don't have to start on the A, and I don't have to go in order. So with that said, I can play those same 7 notes in any order over a backing track in the key of A minor, and everything's going to work because I'm just using the framework of notes from the A natural minor scale. I can then form another pattern up here. So I can start on this A. So here's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, back at A. I could start on this A, B, C, D, E, F, G, back at A. I could fill in the lower notes on the low E string because the high E string and the low E string contain the same notes. So this pattern right here is another pattern. So you could technically say that this pattern doesn't start on the note A because it's starting here. This is the note E, so E, F, G, and then here's your A. But as I said, you don't have to play these notes in any particular order. It doesn't matter what order you play these notes in. All right, so that's another pattern. I can then form another pattern right around in this area. So I could start on the note A here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then here's A. I could then fill in the remaining notes, A, B, C, D, E, F. I can then fill in the notes down here. So if this is A, this is G, F, E, D, C. So I have this other pattern here. So this pattern, technically the lowest note of this pattern would be the note C, but it's still the same 7 notes. So now I've just filled in this much of the area of the guitar using just those 7 notes. Now I have this area to fill in. I could use another pattern here using just those same 7 notes. Here's your note A. So I could start out here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And then A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And then A, G, F. So here's another pattern using those same 7 notes. So I just filled out the whole entire fretboard using those 7 notes, and it formed a bunch of different patterns. So if they're not modes, what are they? Well, they're just visualization systems. There's different ways of visualizing the scale patterns. There is the 3 pattern visualization method, there's the 5 pattern visualization method, and there's the 7 pattern visualization method of the diatonic scale. Nothing to do with modes, these are just the different patterns. 3 patterns, 5 patterns, 7 patterns. I personally prefer the 3 pattern method. Some people prefer the 7 pattern method. Some people prefer the 5 pattern method. I'll post a link to all the different visualization methods below if you want to check all of them out. My preferred way is to do it in 3 because I like to simplify things as much as possible. So you can cover the entire fretboard, the entire diatonic scale, crossing the entire fretboard using just 3 patterns. So that is my preferred way to visualize the fretboard. That's just how I do it. So check out this quick demo real quick, and you're going to see that you can play these various different patterns of 7 notes, and you can play them in any order. And as long as you're playing them over a backing track that's in the key of A minor, then any one of these A minor scale patterns is going to work. Has nothing to do with modes, it's all just the key of A minor. Alright, point number 8. My playing sounds too scaly and disconnected from the chords in the rhythm section, therefore I must learn my modes. Again, this is another time where modes is misunderstood. This doesn't have anything to do with modes. Again, you don't need to worry about modes here. What you need to worry about is chord tones. So, as I said, when you're soloing over a chord progression that's in just one key, so if you're soloing over a chord progression that's in the key of A minor, all the chords are part of the key of A minor, the scale that you're going to use to solo over that chord progression is going to be the A natural minor scale. The A natural minor scale just contains 7 notes. Those 7 notes can be found all up and down the entire fretboard, forming all different patterns and stuff like that. But you're just playing the A natural minor scale over the entire chord progression. Over every single chord in the chord progression, you're using the same scale. One scale, all the chords. So the best sounding notes to play within the scale are going to be what are known as the chord tones. So if you are playing a progression that contains the chords A minor to G to F, the A minor chord contains the notes A, C, and E. So within the A minor scale, you're going to want to focus on the A's, the C's, and the E's. When the chord progression moves to the G chord, which contains the note G, B, and D, within the A minor scale, you're going to want to focus on the notes G, B, and D. When it then moves to the F chord, which contains the notes F, A, and C, you're going to want to focus on F, A, and C within those 7 notes. So all 7 notes are going to work over all of the chords, but the best sounding notes, the notes that are going to cause your lead playing to sound the most connected to the underlying chords, are going to be the chord tones. So there's 7 notes to choose from in the scale. 3 notes are going to be the best sounding notes on a per chord basis. So I'm just going to kind of demonstrate this real quick. I'm just going to use this scale pattern here. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. So I'm only going to use these notes. All right, and then I'm going to play a chord progression, and I'm going to show you that I'm just going to light up the chord tones as the chords are changing. And those are going to be the notes that I try and sustain on. And you're going to hear that they tend to sound the best over the underlying chords in the progression. So you can see that even when I was noodling in this little pattern of 7 notes right here, just confining myself to just this little area, that was my scale pattern. The entire scale was working, but certain notes were sounding better over certain chords because those were the chord tones. Those were the notes that were lighting up within the scale pattern. So if you take that idea and you span it over the entire fretboard, you're still going to have the same concept. It's just going to be a much larger picture. All right, so your A minor scale is still just going to be 7 notes. Those 7 notes are forming all these different patterns and stuff like that. Within those 7 notes, you're going to have particular notes that sound good on a per chord basis. Those are going to be your chord tones. And, so it's 2 layers. You have to see the scale. You have to visualize the scale. And then as the chord tones as the chords are changing, the chord tones are going to be lighting up. Hopefully in your mind. That's the goal. It takes a long time. It takes many, many years to be able to clearly see this, but that's what's going on. So you have the scale is your layer 1, then you have your chord tones, which is layer 2. So the caged system is a way of visualizing layer 2, and then the different scale pattern visualization methods is a way of visualizing number 1. So below I'll post an in-depth lesson to both of those. Layer 1, I visualized the scale using 3 patterns. Layer 2, I visualized the chord tones using caged. I'll post a link to both of those lessons below because that's a topic that both of those videos are relatively long. So if you want to dive into learning a little bit more about those things, check those videos out. This is just a brief overview of the concept. Okay, so what exactly are modes then? So if modes are not just patterns on the fretboard that allow you to play in key over a chord progression that's all part of the same key, and modes are not something that you switch up on a per chord basis, you're not playing one mode over one chord and then another mode over another chord and then another mode over another chord. If that's not modes, then what exactly are modes? The easiest way to describe modes is if you can understand the difference between a major key and a minor key, then you understand modes. So take your key signature that we've been working in this entire part 1 in this video so far, the key signature of C major / A minor. You have these chords available to you in this key signature. 3 chords are major, 3 chords are minor. You also have another chord that's found in this key signature that's not part of the circle of fifths. It's not a major or a minor chord. We're just looking at just these 6 chords though. So every key signature has 3 major chords and 3 minor chords. If you make your C major chord to be the tonal center and you write a chord progression using these chords, make the C chord the tonal center, so that started and ended on the C major chord. Let's say I played that the entire 3-minute song and the whole band jammed on that 3-chord chord progression. The lead guitar player could be anywhere on the guitar. It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with patterns, just the music was based around that 3-chord chord progression. That music is C Ionian, or that music is written in the C Ionian mode. So I could take those same chords to pull from. I could use any of the chords, but let's say I just want to base it around the A minor chord. The progression of the song is going to be something like this. So the whole song being based around that chord progression, the whole piece of music is going to sound different. It's going to be written in a minor key. It's going to be Aeolian. That's the sound that's being produced, Aeolian. So if you can understand the difference between major keys, which is the Ionian sound, and minor keys, which is the Aeolian sound, then you understand the difference between modes. That's what modes are. Modes are sounds. So you can write a chord progression based on other chords aside from the C chord or the A minor chord in this key signature, and that's how you would write modal chord progressions. So using your circle of fifths, you can always tell by the position of the chord of which mode is associated with each chord. Outer circle center position is Ionian, inner circle counterclockwise is Dorian, inner circle clockwise is Phrygian, outer circle counterclockwise is Lydian, outer circle clockwise is Mixolydian, inner circle center position is Aeolian. So outer circle center position chord is always going to be your Ionian chord. That's going to be your tonal center, which you write a chord progression based around in order to make the Ionian sound. Inner circle center position is always going to be your Aeolian chord. So if you write a chord progression and then you make that your tonal center, that's going to be your Aeolian sound. That's going to be the Aeolian mode. You can make any of these other chords. So if I want to make the D minor chord to be my tonal center, then the progression is going to be Dorian. I would still be using the same stuff. I still have the same chords to pull from, but if I can effectively make D minor to be my tonal center, the chord progression then becomes a Dorian chord progression. The whole band would then follow this Dorian chord progression. The lead guitar player would be soloing up and down the entire neck of the guitar, producing the Dorian sound. The piano player who would play fills would follow the chord progression. The Dorian sound would be coming out of the piano player. The singer would be, everything about this. If you're basing your progression around this D minor chord and that's your tonal center, it is a Dorian sound. It's not going to be the Ionian sound. It's not going to be the Aeolian sound. It's going to be the Dorian sound. So every mode is like, you can think of it as keys, major keys, minor keys, other keys, Dorian type of keys. Carlos Santana is famous for writing stuff in Dorian. So like Como Va, he's got a couple other ones, but he writes in the Dorian mode all the time. And he then solos. So it has kind of like, it's a Spanishy type of sound. It's minor, but it's not as sad as minor. It's a little bit happier than minor. Well, that sound that you're hearing that you can't quite put your finger on, that's Dorian. All right, so it's major keys, Ionian, minor keys, Aeolian. Then you have your other modes, Dorian, Lydian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. The thing with modes is the reason that they're not used quite as often as major keys and minor keys is because they're not quite as stable. So the more chords that you use in the progression, the more likely that it's going to be either Ionian or Aeolian. Our ear just has the tendency to want to hear things as major keys or minor keys, otherwise known as Ionian mode or Aeolian mode. The less chords that you use, the more likely you are to successfully be able to write a piece of music in a mode. The more chords that you use from a key signature, the less likely it's going to be modal. Because when you start using 4 chords or 5 chords, your ear is going to start hearing the tonal center as, either Aeolian or Ionian. Those are the 2 stable sounding modes. That's not to say that the other modes can't be forced with more chords, but it takes a little bit of creativity. But just understand that modes are sounds. Modes are not patterns on the fretboard. And even though modes are associated with each chord, each of the chord within a key signature has its associated mode, that does not mean that as you're soloing over a progression that you have to switch modes every time a chord changes. All right? The progression as a whole is the mode. The progression, the entire progression, if you look at the entire progression and you hear the progression as a piece of music and you sit down and you feel the vibe of that music, that vibe that you're feeling is the mode. All right, so hopefully I made that point clear. I've talked a lot more about modes. I will post my recent 3-part series, 2 modes below. Definitely check out that 3-part series if you really want to dive into the subject further. That's all I'm going to talk about for this video. Point 10 is going to be about scale intervals versus chord intervals. So when you're talking about intervals such as roots, thirds, fifths, sevenths, things like that, make sure that you're clear on whether you're talking about the scale interval or the chord interval. They're 2 different things, but they're connected. There's a chord scale connection and everything like that. But when you're talking about specific intervals, just make sure you're clear on whether it's the scale interval or the chord interval. This is very easy to get confused. For example, let's say that I am soloing over a chord progression that contains A minor, G major, and F major. So the chord progression is this. So over that chord progression that's in the key of A minor, I would use my A natural minor scale to solo over it. The A natural minor scale will work over all 3 of those chords because all 3 of those chords are part of the key of A minor. Therefore, my A minor scale or A natural minor scale would be the scale to use over all the chords. The root of the A minor scale is going to be the note A. So the note A is going to be my scale root. When I'm playing over the A minor chord, the root of that particular chord is also going to be the note A. So in that case, the scale root and the chord root are the same thing. But once I get to the G major chord in that progression, I'm still soloing over the progression using my A minor scale because I'm just using one scale over all of the chords which are part of that key. But let's say I really want to start honing in on, chord tones of the G chord. So within the A minor scale, my best sounding notes are going to be the notes G, B, and D. G is the root of the G chord, B is the third of the G chord, D is the fifth of the G chord. So now we're talking about roots, thirds, and fifths, but those are chord intervals. So the root of the chord in this case is G, the root of the scale is still A. So that's where people get confused a lot. So this is going to be a little bit hard to try and explain this in detail in this one particular lesson. I'll make sure to post more in-depth lessons on this below. But where does this stuff come from? So every chord in existence is derived from its associated major scale. So where does the A minor chord come from? It comes from the A major scale. Where does the G major chord come from? It comes from the G major scale. Where does the F major chord come from? It comes from the F major scale. Let's say I have some kind of funky chord like a D minor 7 flat 5 or something. Where does that chord come from? It comes from the D major scale. Every chord is derived from its associated major scale. Does that mean that you have to switch scales every time you play chords? No. When you're playing chords that are all part of a key signature, you just play that one particular, or that one scale of the key that the chords are from. But if you want to know where the chords derived from, if you really want to know the theoretical reason of where these chords come from or how they came to be, they come from their respective major scales. So that's where people get confused a lot. This is going to make more sense in the next point, but just be clear. You have scale intervals and you have chord intervals. Be clear about which one you're talking about if you want to be able to communicate this stuff effectively. So let's look at the next concept, and this may make a little bit more sense. All right, so what about extended chords, such as add 9s or 11s or 13s and things like that? You see all these numbers in these chord symbols. Where do they come from? Well, they come from the major scale. Everything comes from the major scale, as I said in the previous point. So if you have a chord such as, say, C add 9, that comes from the C major scale. If you have a chord like D minor 7 flat 5, that comes from the D major scale. Every chord is derived from the major scale, its respective major scale. So let's look at a C add 9. it comes from the second octave of the major scale. So when you're taking these chords and you're creating these chords, you're going to take a 2-octave version of the scale. So 1 octave of the C major scale would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B. The second octave would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Then you can end it on the C. So you have all these notes. You have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So when you see 9s and 11s, you're just simply counting. So the major part of it, the C major part of this chord is root 3rd 5th. So that's where you get the C major part. And if you want to add the 9, where do you get the 9 from? Well, you count 9. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. So the note D is going to be the 9. So you just add the 9 onto your major chord. So C add 9. That's where you get a C add 9. So that's how you create all these extended chords. When you see a 13 or when you see 11 or when you see a 7 or something like that, you're taking the major scale, you're writing it out on a piece of paper, and you are, it's just math. It's straight math. You count till you get your 13th note, you put that 13th note in there, and then you have some sort of a 13 chord. It comes from the 2-octave scale. So that's where these extended chords come from. So extended chords, or just basic major and minor chords without the numbers on there, it doesn't really make a difference. Chords can either be in key or they can be out of key. Chords are in key if the notes that make up the chord are also part of the notes that make up the key scale. As we said, the key scale is usually just 7 notes. But if the chord that you're using contains notes that are not part of the key scale, that would be considered an out-of-key chord. You can still use out-of-key chords in chord progressions, just recognize that it's not part of the key. It's a non-diatonic chord. In-key chords are known as diatonic chords. Out-of-key chords are non-diatonic chords. So no matter how funky the chord happens to be, no matter how many numbers and susses and symbols and whatever happens to be in the chord symbol, if you break down that chord and you look at exactly what notes make up that specific chord, if all of those notes are part of the key scale that you're working in, then that is an in-key chord. If one of those notes of the chord is not part of the key, it's an out-of-key chord. Out-of-key chords are used all the time. They add interest to your songs, but just recognize in-key versus out-of-key. So that's where extended chords come from. Point number 12 is to understand the difference between diatonic theory and blues theory. So people that have been playing blues for years, then they go to learn diatonic theory, they get confused. And same, it's the other way around. So people that are used to studying diatonic theory and they maybe were classically trained and then they go and try and learn blues, they get confused because they're 2 different sets of rules. So just understanding that is going to help you out. It's going to help you out, just simply knowing that there's a difference, all right? So diatonic theory is all about the chord scale connection. So everything that we've talked about so far in this lesson has been about diatonic theory. If you're playing a chord progression where all the chords are part of the key of A minor, that means that every single chord, every single note that makes up every single chord is going to be one of the 7 notes of the A natural minor scale. So every single chord is going to contain a note from the A natural minor scale. Then if you want to play leads over it, every single note that you're going to use in your leads is going to be one of the 7 notes of the A natural minor scale. Everything is just part of those 7 notes. Everything is diatonic to the key of A natural minor. That's diatonic theory. Blues theory, on the other hand, is like a hybrid of major and minor. So it kind of just goes in the face of diatonic theory. It says, okay, I want to take major, I want to take minor, I want to take both of those tonalities, I want to mix them together, and that's blues. That's blues theory in a nutshell. So rather than trying to explain blues theory to you, in this lesson, just simply check out my recent lesson that I did. It's called 4 Approaches to Soloing Over a 12-Bar Blues Progression. In that lesson, I show you 4 different approaches. Each of those 4 approaches are completely do not follow the rules of diatonic theory, but they do follow the rules of blues theory. They sound good. All 4 approaches work over the 12-bar blues progression that I'm showing how to solo over, but that is the blues theory approach. So just understand there is a difference between diatonic theory and blues theory. All right, then point 13, there's so much information, I need a clear roadmap. So I do agree that there is a ton of information out there. There's so much stuff you can learn on the guitar. It's a never-ending journey. I'm still learning. Steve Vai is still learning. Joe Satriani is still learning. The brand new guitar player is still learning. The guy that's way better than me but not quite as good as Joe Satriani, he's still learning. We're all still learning. It's a never-ending thing. So accept that your whole life is going to be about learning this guitar. But as far as things that I would consider to be important to focus on if you don't know where to focus, number one, knowing how to play any chord anywhere on the entire fretboard. That would be something I would suggest to know how to do. And how do you do that? You would learn your cage system. I'm not going to go in depth about the cage system. I made a super in-depth, super comprehensive lesson about the cage system, and exactly how to do what I'm talking about here is explained in that 45-minute lesson, which I will post below. But if you understand your cage system, you can play any major chord anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar. If you can play any major chord anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar, you can take that major chord shape and you can manipulate it to become a minor chord. Or you can manipulate it to become an augmented chord or a diminished chord. Or you can add notes to it and make it become a 9th chord or an 11th chord or a 13th chord. So if you know your major chord shapes and you can find a major chord shape on the guitar, you can take that major chord shape and you can manipulate it into any chord you want. So having an understanding of the cage system is, in my opinion, 95% of the battle. The remaining 5% is knowing how to take the chord and manipulate it into what you want, into a minor chord or diminished chord or whatever. That 45-minute caged lesson that I am linking you to below explains all that stuff. So you won't have to rely on chord charts anymore. You won't have to rely on chord books or anything like that. You will just know how to make up chords anywhere on the fretboard. It may take you a minute or two to think about it, but it's a lot, in my opinion, it's a lot better to be, okay, I want to know how to play a C sharp 13 chord, and I can think about it, and within, under 20 seconds, I can figure out how to play that chord using any shape I want, just by having an understanding of the cage system, and then knowing how to manipulate major chords into the chords that I'm trying to turn it into. So learn your cage system, and then you can play any chord anywhere on the entire neck of the guitar. That's the first thing. When it comes to soloing, just right off the bat, I made an 8-week Solo Like a Pro course, it's called. It's just one video. It gives you exact instructions of what you're supposed to do for each of the 8 weeks, and the objective is to get you to solo over the entire fretboard using the necessary scales and the necessary patterns, but without having to learn each and every single position in detail. So a lot of people seem to really like this course that I made. It's just one single video course, but I'm calling it a course. A lot of people seem to really like that, so I'm posting a link to that below too. But the idea here is the scale that you want to learn is your diatonic scale. So if there's a chord progression happening that's in a key, whether it's in a minor key or whether it's in a major key, it doesn't really matter. You just want to know how to solo over that chord progression using the key scale. The key scale is the diatonic scale. The diatonic scale is called the natural minor scale if the chord progression is if the chord progression is a minor sounding chord progression, the diatonic scale is called the natural minor scale. If the chord progression is a major sounding chord progression, the diatonic scale is then called the major scale. It's still the same thing. The patterns are still all the same. I talked about this in part 1 of this video, or the previous video. I talked about all that. So the scale patterns are all the same, but it's just the diatonic scale. So that's what you want to learn. So the diatonic scale can be visualized using the 3 patterns method, the 5 patterns method, or the 7 patterns method. I prefer to visualize the diatonic scale in 3 patterns. As I said, you can cover the entire fretboard using just 3 patterns, and that will cover the entire fretboard of the diatonic scale. You then may want to focus on the pentatonic scale. So rather than thinking of the pentatonic scale as being something different than the diatonic scale, it's really just 5 of the 7 total notes. The diatonic scale contains 7 notes. The pentatonic scale contains 5 of those 7 notes. So you can either think of it as just a watered down version of the diatonic scale, or you can think about it as a completely new scale altogether. Or some people might even prefer to learn the pentatonic scale first, learn the 5 positions of the pentatonic scale, and then figure out how to add the extra notes into each of the 5 positions to create the full 7-note diatonic scale. So these things go hand in hand. So that would be the 5 patterns approach. But at the end of the day, you're just learning how to solo in key over a chord progression using the various different visualization methods. And then on top of that, you just want to see how the blue note fits into each of the pentatonic positions. So there's 5 pentatonic positions. The blue note fits into each of those 5 positions. So that would be the 3 main things that I would focus on: diatonic scale, pentatonic scale, blue scale. Learn how to do that over the entire fretboard. If you don't want to learn every single pattern across all 6 strings, that's what that 8-week Solo Like a Pro course is for. That still gets you covered the entire fretboard, but it's a streamlined approach. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a shortcut approach. I guess it's a shortcut approach, but a lot of people really seem to dig that. It's helped a lot of people out, so definitely check that one out too. 8 weeks Solo Like a Pro takes into account diatonic scale, pentatonic scale, and the blue note, and just kind of gives you the stuff you need and reduces the stuff that you don't need. Alright, so that's going to do it for this video. That's the 13 concepts. So as I said, if you want to dive deeper into any one of these 13 concepts, I linked to a lot of lessons below. I've talked about every single one of these concepts in much greater detail before in those other lessons. So if you do want to dive deep into any one of these concepts, the links to all that stuff can be found below. Those are all free lessons, so check them out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.